morning. Isn't it interesting that Donna sang a song right out of the Garden of Gethsemane, Thy will be done. In Sunday school this morning, Pastor Dave alluded to the Garden of Gethsemane when he said how we have to pray, Lord, not as I will, but as you will. And here it is, friends, right here, reverent submission. Reverent submission. Look at it in verse 8. Although he was a son, he was the sinless Son of God. He learned obedience. Now let me ask you a question. Now I know that there's many different places where you can learn something, but normally you go to school to learn something, right? I wish I could remember. So often I went to school, but I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking about other things. I couldn't wait to get home after school. I could go play with my friends. You go to school to learn something. Now, friends, please try to understand what I'm about to tell you right now. This is very important. It's very powerful, but we all get this. Jesus is the sinless Son of God. He's co-equal with the Father in every way. In eternity, in power, He's unchanging. He's all-knowing and ever-present. He can be present everywhere in the world at the same time. Not only does Jesus know everything, the past, the present, and what will happen in the future. Check this out. He knows every possibility in every different situation. If somebody would have made this choice instead of that choice, he knows all the different possibilities that can be in any given situation. There's one thing Jesus didn't know. Oh, wait a second. I thought he was omniscient. I thought Jesus knew everything. Before the cross, there was one thing that Jesus did not know experientially. He knew everything else. But there's one thing prior to the cross that Jesus did not know experientially. You know what that one thing was, dear friends? It was pain. He didn't know what it was like to suffer. He never suffered in his soul, in his mind. He never suffered spiritually. To know that pain of separation with his Father, when he became a sin offering and literally became the very essence, the embodiment of sin. He suffered spiritually. Jesus never knew that before the cross. He never suffered in his soul. He never suffered in his body. He did not know experientially what pain was all about. But after he was arrested by the temple guard and they beat him, then they took him to the Antonia fortress, the Roman garrison that was next to the Temple Mount area. And they stripped him and they spit on him and they scourged him and they put a crown of thorns over his head and they nailed him to the cross and finally putting a sword through his side. It wasn't until after then that he became this great, merciful, and high priest in the things of God, because he suffered the way that we suffered. He cried and shed tears, and his sweat became his blood. He understands anxiety. Everything, friends, that you and I would face. Brokenness and pain. They say that his shoulders were out of joint. You're hurting today. You're in pain in your body, in your mind, in your heart, your soul, and your spirit. We have one today, a high priest. He understands. He can not just sympathize with us. He can empathize with us. He knows everything that we've gone through, dear friends. He learned reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience. And where did he learn that obedience? In the Garden of Gethsemane. when he prayed to the Father, and he said, Father, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Your will be done. He cried out to the Father. He said, Father, is there any other way we can do this? And even Jesus, he told his disciples, he said, don't you know that if I wanted to, he said, I could ask the Father, and he'll send legions of angels to take them all away. He submitted to the Father's will. And he learned obedience by the things that he suffered. And once made perfect. It was after the suffering, friends. It was after the pain, after the cross, the shedding of the blood, that he was entirely perfect, especially in the area of understanding pain and everything that you and I go through. He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest, not in the order of Aaron, but in the order of Melchizedek. Now we're coming into the home stretch here in just a moment, please. Let's finish chapter 5 out. Warnings against falling away. We have much to say about this, but it's hard to explain because you're still slow to learn. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. Here it is. You need milk and not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. Here it is, friends, in verse 14. We'll close with this. But solid food, meat, is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. We're talking about spiritual growth and spiritual maturity. Number one, it takes time. When you first become a Christian, we all come into Christianity the same way. You're a spiritual babe. And don't feel bad about that. You've had children. When they're born, you know that you can't give a little suckling baby a piece of ribeye steak. They'll choke on it. You'll kill them. You give them milk. But in time, as they continue to grow and they begin to understand spiritual things, then you can start giving them some of the meat of the Word. It takes time to spiritually grow and mature and gain an understanding in God's Word about spiritual things. But also, friends, and I'll close with this thought, we also grow as we walk with the Lord and you experience God in your life. The things you go through, and you see the hand of God in your life, and your faith is strengthened. And sometimes, friends, it's even by the disappointing situations and circumstances in life. God is not a genie in a bottle that you rub him and he comes out and he gives you 3 wishes. That's not God. And I tell you what, I guess maybe when I first came into this Christian life, maybe that was my impression of God. As you go through life and you face these disappointing situations in life and your heart breaks and you don't understand these things. And you say, God, I don't understand this, Father. Well, what are you doing here? And then here comes the still small voice that speaks to your heart and says this. Will you still trust me? Even though you don't understand this. You don't like this. This is not your choice for your life. You don't agree with this. You didn't sign up for this. But will you still trust me? It's in those times, friends. Through the good and the bad, we really come to understand God. Begin to know his will for our lives. Spiritual maturity. We'll never completely, totally become spiritually mature in this life. When we see Christ as he is and we're brought into his presence, then we will be made complete. As we see him as he is, we'll be made like him. But we're called in this life to grow in grace, grow in love, grow in our knowledge of the Scriptures. And one of the old professors at the Bible college said this: if you know. That's why it's so important to read the scriptures, friends, and study them. If you know, you'll grow. Especially when we obey what God reveals to us in His Word. All right, let's close, shall we? Thank you.